Toronto. So glad you're here. Thank you. Yeah, so World Information Architecture Day this year, 32 locations, 17 countries, 5 continents, and Toronto is the only Canada location this year. So I'm so glad you're here. World IA Day is created by the World Information Architecture Association, which is a nonprofit based out of the US. And our driving principles are to believe in community building, empowering leaders, grassroots organizing, growing together. And the mission of the World Information Architecture Association is to build and connect a global community of IA advocates and practitioners, promote the role of information architecture in all sorts of fields, provide resources for learning and professional development with events such as this, and engage IA academics and professionals, and even just people who are interested in IA, in research and development. We aim for a world where information is understood. We want to imagine a world where people can easily find and understand what they need. And so World IA Day is the one day a year that the community gets together for a global conference curated and organized by volunteers all over the world. So this event was put on just by local Toronto volunteers, and yeah, every different location all throughout the world is doing the same thing simultaneously today. So be sure you're checking social media for World IA Day hashtags to see what everyone else is up to all throughout the world. You can see on our map, maybe it's a little hard to see, but there's a map where there's pinpoints on all the different locations throughout the world. And as we said, 5 continents, 22 countries. It's a really cool event, and I'm always happy to participate in this and help organize it for Toronto. We'd like to give a big thanks to our global sponsors and partners. These are the companies who are helping out all the events throughout the world today. Optimal Workshop, Pool Party, Esri, Abbey Covert, Rosenfeld, Boxes and Arrows, the Information Architecture Conference, 24 Hours of UX, World Usability Day, and also the DIA Design Guild. But we'd really like to thank our local sponsors. So Spaces was able to provide us this venue for a very nice price. So big thank you to Spaces. We love them. And then, of course, we are also sponsored by Precision Content, the company that I work for, as well as Poligo, the company that my co-organizer Joe works for. I'll give a little bit of an intro about what Precision Content is all about. We are a consultancy that specializes in end-to-end services for technical communications. We provide services in writer training, content strategy, information architecture, content lifecycle management, content publishing, and so on. And we use our expertise in micro-content and structured authoring with DITA XML to empower our clients across a variety of industries to make their content ready for the future. We also train writers in our robust and systematic content lifecycle solution that helps enterprises manage content as a corporate asset. Precision Content, of course, makes content more precise. And so our next Precision Content guest training program starts on April 6th. So if you're interested in attending a free guest training program where you can learn more about our Precision Content writing principles to help make your content ready for the future, you can talk to me, you can talk to my boss, Rob Hanna, in the blue Precision Content shirt, or any other Precision Content employee, and we'll be glad to give you some of that information. I'll pass things next to Joe, who can introduce our other sponsor, Poligo.
This is way too high. Too tall. Hello, my name is Joe. I work at Poligo as a solutions engineer and an IA. So Poligo is a CCMS. We're based out of Sweden, and we are the fastest growing CCMS of 2022. We pride ourselves in being really user-friendly and in helping people onboard from unstructured into structured environments. And because we are growing so rapidly, we are currently hiring more IAs. So of course, if you or you know somebody who is looking for opportunity, speak to me or right now, later, or through LinkedIn.
Thank you, Joe. So we've got some official hashtags that you can use if you're on social media today. Hashtag World IA Day, as well as WIAD23. Also World IA Day Toronto. So any combination of those, if you use those in your posts, we'd appreciate it, and you'll be able to see what sorts of stuff everyone else is doing around the world today. I want to introduce ourselves, the local organizers. So my name is Josh Anderson, and you just heard from Joe Lamb. We are the co-organizers of today's event. But we also have a big team of volunteers, Faith, Dakshana, Marcella, Jesse, Grace, Kay, who have all done a lot to help us put on this event. So big thank you to our volunteers. We appreciate them so much. And finally, we want to make sure you know that we're committed to your safety. We have a code of conduct that everybody agreed to when they signed up on Eventbrite. And it applies to all participants, including volunteers, attendees, and speakers at all locations. So we don't tolerate harassment of participants, speakers, or volunteers in any form. If you have an issue, you can come talk to the organizers. You can also send a message to safety@worldiaday.org, and somebody is actively monitoring that throughout the day. Today's agenda, the times are a little different because we pushed back the start of it, but the order of events is still the same. We'll start with our introductions, as we're doing now, then we'll hear from Constance Cerf, then Keith Schengili-Roberts, and Michael Priestley. Then we'll have a bit of a break time for networking. You can always go up to the food over there. And then we'll have our lightning speakers, Trevor Cross and Grace Chen, followed by a speaker panel with all of our speakers from today. And we'll end with some raffles of a few books that we've got over there. And then as we're exiting, we can play a recording of our global keynote. With that, we're ready for our first speaker, Constance Cerf, and I'll pass things back to Joe to read out an introduction.
So I'm going to talk over here, so Constance can sit up while I speak. Alrighty. So while I do that, Constance started her UX career by working for the UK government before moving to Canada. Now they lead the content design team for Uber Eats. Please another round of applause for Constance.
Can you hear me? Yeah? At the back? Okay, great. So today I'm gonna talk about how to organize your junk drawer. And what I mean by that is how to think about the type of content that accumulates outside of what I call core experiences. So that's like not the main thing that users are coming to your product for. I'm going to be covering in the next 20 minutes what ends up in your junk drawer, what it means for our products, and how we go about organizing it. So, what is a junk drawer? It doesn't really physically have to be a drawer, but in the physical world, it's that box, closet, drawer that's filled with both things that are really unimportant and also the most important things you own. And it's usually the last thing that you want to pack when you move in. And my theory is that junk drawers in our physical world behave quite similarly to junk drawers in our products. But I wanted to test this out, so I took a look at my own junk drawer. If I'm going to give a talk on it, I better start at home. So this is what I found. There was my cat's health book, there was some old birthday cards, there was an English certificate that I have to use for my PR and immigration, some broken frames, some old samples, an old Oyster card, which is the travel card for a city I no longer live in. There was some socks, clean. There was a COVID test kit, charger, and a lip balm. So I was like, okay, let me set out creating an IA for this drawer. So off the bat, I got rid of these three things. The broken frame, maybe I had hopes of fixing it. Old samples, not going to use them. The travel card, they've changed the system. I'm never ever going to use that card. And then these are the things that were left. So I thought, okay, how can I create some sort of structure for these things? So I decided to group these two things together, my cat's health book and the English certificate for immigration, because they're both essential at the points that I need them, but I need them incredibly infrequently. So when my cat goes to the vet, I need that health book. When I'm applying for PR, maybe once, I'm going to need that immigration certificate. So I'll probably group them with other things that are essential but infrequent, like my passport, things like that. And it's probably going to be in a lower traffic area in my house. And then the old birthday cards, they have sentimental value, but I use them infrequently and they're not essential. So I'd probably group them with other things about nature, maybe like memorabilia, other types of things. And then the third group was the essential and frequent, and they probably don't need to be there at all. They need to be contextualized. So COVID test kit, charger, lip balm, they probably need to be in high traffic areas that I use a lot, like my bedside table. The socks, well, the most contextual place for a pair of socks is a wardrobe with other socks, so that's probably where I put them. And so this is how I went about, and I was glad to see that, you know, my physical junk drawer did have a lot of the same qualities and problems as junk drawers in our products. But, you know, before I go on too far on how I reorganize my house, how does this show up for our digital products? So, junk drawers in our IA are usually found in the deeper levels of navigation. If you do have junk drawers in the first level of navigation, that's also an issue, but it's a bigger issue and the one we're not going to cover today. And they're usually found in things like settings, account sections, filters, frequently asked questions, the place where we kind of let things accumulate over time. But, you know, they could be anywhere, as long as it's a place which has both important content and unimportant content that's usually unpredictable and unorganized. So let's take a look at some examples. So, you know, I started with my own junk drawer at home. I felt like it was only fit before I picked on anyone else to start with my junk drawer at work. So I took a look at the Uber Rides app, and I don't know if you can see here, but there's a long list. I went straight to the account section because that tends to be one of the guilty parties. There's a lot of different content here. There's some content that I would expect. So there's my name, there's my Uber rating, and there's the fact that I belong to Uber One. Okay, that seems like the kind of thing I'd expect to be linked to my account. Then we have messages, send a gift, Uber Eats promotions, that's for a different app, Uber Eats favorites, okay. And then inside of account we have settings. Now I don't know if I would have expected that. So I went deeper, and then here we have my name, my number, and my email address. I'd actually have expected that on the previous page. That feels like more accounts and settings. Then we have safety, privacy, security. Okay, probably more expected within the settings section. But the point is that it contains both unexpected and expected information. And even though it's not core information, you don't come to Uber to find your security settings. You come to Uber to get a ride or to get some food. Usually people are in these sections when something's gone wrong. Or they need to fix something with their account, they need to fix something because they've had a safety issue, and therefore like they're in a state of more like heightened, kind of like their emotions are running high, and they do not want to have to sort around your junk drawer to find what they need. And it also causes like higher churn. Then I went into one of my favorite settings section, which behaves a little bit differently. This is the Gmail settings. So this is kind of like a list of miscellaneous micro-interactions, one-off toggles with very little structure. And one of my least favorite junk drawers within settings is general settings, because that's literally where anything can happen. Within this, there's a lot of things that are default to on that probably could be hidden. But within this Gmail settings, I don't know if you've used it, there's also some quite important things, like you can change your signature, it's like 3 scrolls down. You can also put on your vacation mailer. So those seem like they could be more contextualized, and yet they're buried somewhere deep in the settings section. So I think we have a pretty conclusive kind of study of how junk drawers might show up, but how do we go about organizing them? So I think the most important thing is mapping out every single content element. If you're in the process of designing part of your taxonomy or rethinking a part of your user experience, map out every single element and give it a home with purpose. So what I see a lot in the product teams, design teams, is that For stakeholder buy-in, we use really high-level content maps, and that's fine because wider stakeholders don't want to see like where you're going to put that little rewards tab or things like that. It's not catchy. It's not the kind of thing that's going to win over and get you buy-in. But that means that we skim over the content that becomes a loose part during the actual implementation process, and then it ends up being filed into the draft drawer. So you might have a top-level content map that you show stakeholders, and then your own content map that is the detail going into all of the weeds where you're thinking about every single piece of content, including the edge cases, so that it doesn't come up when developers are like, oh wait, this is where we put it. And also identify the potential junk drawer content. Like, what is the kind of stuff that can grow over time? Because in general, products get more complex over time, not less. So if you're starting with something that looks like, okay, it's 2 things that are not that organized, over time it's going to become 12, and you're creating the potential for more and more things to grow. And then define some rules. Like, even in the setting sections, what are the unique characteristics of the content you're bringing? Where do users expect to find this information? Is there potential to contextualize it? Like, can you make that setting closer to the thing that the attribute that you're setting the setting for? And if it is a setting, what makes it a setting compared to other attributes that you can customize in your product? And how frequently do you need to access it? Usually you want to put things in the lower levels of navigation, but you don't need to access that frequently. And then avoid catch-all categories in your naming. So making names as descriptive as possible. So general, product teams can, anyone who doesn't have a home can go and put their content in a journal section. It's going to be just like, I had a designer the other day who asked me, like, let's name this content you. And immediately I was like, you, anything could go you. So over the years, it's going to become very complex. If you are using a higher level name, like setting preferences for you, frequently asked questions, add a qualifier before it, like is it business settings, is it account settings, any kind of qualifier will force you to rethink the structure, because the name will no longer be valid when you add more content, and then you're going to have to rethink the structure. And frequently asked questions, if you are adding an FAQ section, make sure those are frequently asked. So usually frequently asked questions are questions that have usually never been asked, but they're just a list of questions that may come up. If you have a data-driven list of questions, which is like the top most frequently asked, you can add that, and then all of the other questions can be organized by topic. And then set out a plan for governance. So a lot of the time, one of the things that's tricky about settings, about accounts, about FAQs, is that no one owns them. And this is especially true in bigger organizations. They don't have a lot of overhead, no one's looking out for them, and so it means that the cost of change goes up. It's also very, very hard to get buy-in to actually fix them. And it's also usually because they're like different pieces of content that different teams own in different bits of code, it's very, very hard. So if you're thinking about your setting sections, your account sections, think about who's going to own it, what's your plan going forward. If things like, do you have like IA guidelines, do you have rules about the types of things that are going to go? If there's a problem, which team is going to be accountable for that? And then lastly, before I end, I just want to acknowledge that these are really hard to avoid and even harder to fix. So like, there is a reason why most of my favorite apps and websites have these unwieldy junk drawers. It's, we work in environments where we're always thinking about the 80% most poor experience and then leaving the 20% edge cases behind. So that's why this happens a lot. So even though, there's like four simple tips to fix your junk drawer, it's not usually that simple. It usually takes a lot of stakeholder buy-in to fix them. And also, it's very hard to monitor them and make sure that they don't occur in the first place. So this is why it's good to be even more intentional on looking out for them, because otherwise they will happen and it's very, very hard to undo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Constance. I would like to ask, does anybody have any questions for Constance? I'm going to bring the microphone over to him. Hopefully I don't trip.
Hi, Constance. I was wondering, what techniques do you and your team use to validate your IA decisions? Like, any testing or?
Yeah, we often use card sorts and tree tests, and then once we've identified the tree tests, the results of the tree test, we'll do concept testing with an information architecture within the UI. That is the ideal process. A lot of the time, the tree test is going to be skipped and you're going to be testing both the IA and the concepts at the same time. And it becomes very hard to know if users are reacting to the UI or if they're reacting to the different structure. So I'd say the ideal would be to start with a tree test, isolate the structure from the UI and then bring them together.
Did you ever have a situation that surprised you? Like you had a mental model and then the results of the test were surprising?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is, I think when areas are more ambiguous, sometimes you do find that the way that people are thinking and grouping things isn't what you came up with. But also sometimes at the beginning, I don't usually start with very strong assumptions. So that means that if you're starting with a card sort, it's quite loose. So the tree test shouldn't surprise you because it's already based on testing to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yes and no.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, I'm going to run over there. Sorry if I knocked over everyone's coffee.
Hi, Constance. Thanks for your talk. My name is Jane, and I think I'm curious about how, not necessarily related to jump drawers specifically, but how you usually work with designers in general. Because I think in your earlier answer, you also mentioned sometimes when you do testing, it's hard to differentiate between the user's reaction towards the UI versus the content. And I think content and design is always goes hand in hand, so I'm curious how your process is for working with designers.
Yeah, that's a great question. For IA projects, I like to try and make sure that we're collaborating on different taxonomies before going into high fidelity for as long as possible. I think there's usually a lot of pressure, at least at Uber, to show high fidelity mockups. And it can give you a false sense of confidence, you've got everything worked out. So I like to try to get designers to engage as much as possible with taxonomies and content models before we go into high fidelity, and then work hand in hand to be okay. And then I do find that as the content designer in the room, I have to remind them that we need to keep going back to is this a different IA or is this a different visualization of this IA in the UI? So we work very closely together to come up with that distinction and then to ship a product that makes the most sense.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question. Anybody? All right, in that case, I actually have a question for everybody. So, Constance, the last slide you have there, it's acknowledging that it's hard to avoid, but even harder to fix. And I want to ask the audience, how many of you are finding yourselves in the fixing position right now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Everybody just raised their hands at this point. So, Constance, question for you then. Why do you think a lot of people end up in the fixing position so easily?
I think it does go down to what I was saying earlier, we always have pressure, at least in the tech companies, very hard to skip the content mapping stages. There's pressures to experiment fast and to ship, ship and then change things, and that works really well with UI changes, but the kind of iterative model, the way that we work in tech, doesn't work as well with IA. You don't want to be restructuring your app for 6 weeks and then doing it again. So there's a bit of friction there between the time it takes to properly like put in a structure. There's also, I think, a lot of different people who are contributing to IA, engineers, data scientists, as well as designers and information architects, and often like they're not having the same conversation, so that also contributes to some of the misalignment that leads to later things having to be fixed.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Constance. I'd like to invite Schengili-Roberts up to the stage and start signing up while I read off your bio. That's a secret, I'm not reading it. Schengili-Roberts is a senior manager for technical writing at AMD, an occasional lecturer on information architecture at the University of Toronto, and a writer behind DataWriter.com. With over 30 years of experience, that's a really wicked sound effect. Okay. With over 30 years of experience as a technical writer, information architect, and industry consultant, he is now back at AMD working on documenting data center computing boards. That actually is used for things like high-end artificial intelligence systems like chatbots. He is in demand as a speaker and has spoken at many conferences on data and information architecture and best practices worldwide. Please give a round of applause to Keith. Would you like to steal my microphone?
There we go. All right. Well, that actually, I'm going to move this slightly aside. There'll probably be a slight, terrible sound as it goes away. There we go. All right. Hello, everybody. Pleased to be here. And testing. 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. We're good. I think we're good. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very snowy and melty Toronto, I guess, today, and glad everybody could actually make it. I actually came in from London, Ontario, which is where I now reside these days, and it was rather fun coming on the train last night and sort of looking at all the snow. I was like, what am I getting myself into? But it's nice to see a good crowd here, and I'm very, very happy to talk about today's subject. And by the way, I understand that the actual theme for this is wayfinding. I only found out about that after I'd done the slide deck, so please don't, there's not a whole lot of wayfinding in it. It's basically, if you're interested in about chatbot technology, then it's wayfinding about chatbot technology. Yeah, okay, we'll go with that. So my talk is called Some Thoughts About Content Strategy and Chatbots. And by the way, you're going to see a whole lot of rather interesting pictures. And now it's not going to come out perhaps as clear as I would like on the screen here, but perhaps in the takeaway slide deck that I'm sure that people can access, you'll be able to see that the vast majority of the images used in the slide deck are in fact computer generated in some fashion or another using either things like DALL-E or Hot AI. In fact, my profile picture, which makes me look like something that has just come out of, say, a Portal or something like that, was also an AI generated image. There's only a couple of images which are not AI generated, and this is just a sort of, to show, demonstrate the technology to some extent. So a little bit more about what I do. I put myself down as an occasional lecturer of information architecture at the University of Toronto for the Faculty of Information, member of the OASIS Data Technical Committee, member of ACM's SIGDOC Committee on Structured Authoring, working, kind of fallen back into the position of Technical Writing Manager at AMD, where I really first launched my career about 15 or so years ago. And I've worked essentially as an IA and consultant since the early 2000s. I have 15 years of experience in data XML, which I think is probably going to be taught by only one person in this room, and that's going to be the person who's going to be talking after me. I actually looked the other day at how long I've been in the industry, and it's about 30 years, so it's a long time, and that explains the gray hair on my rather astronaut-looking paint there. For those who perhaps are interested in the structured authoring front, I'm also the writer behind the DataWriter.com website, which I started back in 2010. has over 418,000 hits since that time, with fairly regularly updated information on things like data conferences, books, so on and so forth, and news and views on things relating to the data XML standard. All right, so let's get to what you came here for. So let's talk a little bit about ChatGPT. So it's really changed the common perception of what chatbots are and what they can do, and really is brought to the fore, you know, to most people as, you know, what the capabilities are possible. Keep in mind, this was essentially launched all the way back in November of 2022. So we're talking, you know, barely a few months, and this is definitely something that a lot of people are interested in and are talking about. The GPT part, which I don't think gets talked about a lot, it stands for Generative Pre-Trained Transformer with, and I love this, GPT-3 is trained on 570 gigabytes of plain text, including English Wikipedia. I find it's like, really? Okay. Used to create human-like text responses. And it also became the fastest growing app in the world with over 100 million users in only a couple of months. Now, news organizations have provided both in-depth and shallow, meaning Fox. It's also well known that it can generate essays, code, poses a threat to like classic search engines by providing, you know, much more detailed responses to questions, also without the, you know, having to scroll down. It's like, you know, add. Oh, here's my answer. But, you know, what about its potential implications as a mean of communication, perhaps even as a business's primary voice? So it's good to know. Now, this information is derived from, interestingly enough, a presentation that I did back in 2018 on talking about chatbots in general, and much of this information is actually related to a really well done Harvard business report study that essentially looked at the uses of chatbots at the time. So essentially there's really three main types of applications for artificial intelligence. One is for cognitive process automation, basically back office administrative and financial activities. So things like, you know, going through and reading, so to speak, and digesting things like legal material, and then summarizing that for legal assistance. Cognitive insight, so looking for patterns in vast volumes of data, and then interpreting their meaning. And then cognitive engagement, so essentially intelligent agents that offer 24/7 customer service, addressing a broad and growing array of issues from password requests to tech support questions. And it's really this last one that we're most interested in. But it's worth noting that it's the one with the least amount of emphasis in the business world, at least until the arrival of something like ChatGPT. So it's worth pointing out that the customer experience really has, you know, surprise, surprise, has become a business imperative. Before the movement of business to the web, key business interactions with customers happened in the physical world. But then our customers moved online, and we moved what had formerly been physical content online as well. Tech content has come to the fore since it often contains targeting for information that people are looking for. So people, an interesting finding is that when things like, say, technical content are not locked down in their own separate search engines, it's often what Google finds first when people are searching for content about a thing, because they're trying to solve a problem, and, you know, surprise, surprise, the marketing content usually doesn't do that. So quite often they may in fact hit the technical, you know, how to fix problem aspect of things first. So, and in general, content strategy coordinates the voice and direction of that content delivery. This is actually one of the only two slides which are not computer generated. So chatbots, at least up until now, have been part of the overall user experience. So you can see this rather, you know, large arc with high-touch conversations on the left-hand side, talking about, you know, field service, you know, live agents, and then moving more to low-touch and then no-touch conversations, where you move from live messaging, omni-channel routing, web and mobile snapping service, and then on the right-hand side we have, you know, chatbots, connected products and tech docs, no touch conversation. Then in between, in the center, feeding all of this are the human inputs. User communities, ticketing systems, blogs, e-commerce, what have you. The human part that actually powers the rest of what's going on here. So the question that has come to the fore in the media has been, can chatbots / chat GPT, usually in the minds of the media quite often there's no distinction being made between the two, which is really not correct. So can it be the primary mode for content delivery? And the answer in short is yes, it is possible. Looking at the most recent Gartner report, which I love, it's called the hype cycle. So I think you can read that pretty much as intended. They're saying that I think within the next, I think it's 3 to 5 years, that many businesses will make this the primary mode in the way that they will communicate with their customer base. But my question here is it preferable? And I have to say that, honestly, only maybe. We're still very much in the early days, and in the meantime, it's likely to become another facet in the overall customer experience journey. And I'd have to say that for any business that, going for the Gartner report actually is to be seen as correct within 3 to 5 years, companies have to start doing the work, today, because it's going to take that long for them to be fully up to speed to deliver a proper customer experience using something like a full-fledged chatbot with like a chat GPT like interface. Which again leads me to think that, yeah, we're probably not going to see it quite so soon as that. So it's worth pointing out that there are some definite drawbacks of ChatGPT from a business perspective. So the potential for inaccurate answers, it's because it's only as accurate as the data and algorithms that are actually fed to it. An interesting thing, if you've actually gone in and tried to play with anything in the recent online system, is that it only has the data that it has to respond to you. So if there is like a current news story, for example, it can't respond accurately because it doesn't have that information handy. It also simply can't handle complex questions. Customer service requiring more in-depth solutions with many factors are simply unlikely to work because most GPTs are designed to answer much more basic queries. And they're very limited in the range of topics they can discuss. So they're trained on their own specific data sets. So they can only provide advice on things within their domain of knowledge. By the way, it's great if you want to, it's really good at coming up with code. So if you need some help trying to do some Python code, it's actually really good at doing that because it knows the Python programming set really well. But outside of specific domains, it still has to be trained. So as I say, it has a general knowledge data set, but it can be trained with, but it has to be trained with more specific domain knowledge. It also has a pronounced lack of empathy / voice. So GPTs can't understand the emotions of users, nor can they respond to them. And again, if someone is upset that their thing is not working and they're talking to a chatbot and they're expecting some form of sympathizing with the customer's situation, yeah, that's not built into the process, not yet. Also, the timeliness of response. It takes considerable computational power to generate a response, which can cause significant delays. The ChatGPT that you're currently using now is hosted by a server farm with significant and tons of dollars in terms of the server requirements. If it seems fast to you, that's because there's been a very heavy investment in hardware in order to make things look that way. It's also worthwhile pointing out that there are some significant costs. So there's the cost of obtaining the hardware. So as I said just on the last slide, it's not cheap, though this could be mitigated by obtaining this as a service. There's also the additional cost of training. So a chatbot or ChatGPT is only as reliable as the information that's fed into it. So it will need regular content updates. So you need to then find the ways to get new content into the system and also ensure that new content is reflected in test questions. And then this is more on the sort of opportunity cost of things, the cost of failure. You have to expect firms to be very cautious when implementing things like chatbots, and current practice actually for the past 5 or so years has really borne this out. Companies are certainly keen on the technology, but they, as I say, at the moment it is part of a larger sort of spectrum of communication, a media that is open to the customer services. So it's not the sole voice; it is one of many. It's worth pointing out, and this I think in some ways may be perhaps a hopeful slide, because this is really the area that I work in specifically, but from what I've seen, it looks as though structuring the content may in fact help. So having it structured using some form of like a structured format, such as XML, does seem to make things easier for chatbots to digest or find content to reference, because well-defined content types plus descriptive metadata makes it easier for chatbots to use, understand, and work with. Now, I'm going to argue here that as information architects and content strategists, we just can't let information fall into essentially the content equivalent of the uncanny valley. So as you may have noticed now, maybe it's a bit hard because things are a bit dim on the screen, but most of the images used in this presentation come from AI art programs. And in most, but not all cases, there's something distinctly off about them. So similarly, we as IAs and content strategists, simply can't afford our content to fall into the content version of an uncanny valley. So there's still a need for us to guide the user's journey. So IAs and CSs will need to play a more focused role to engineer the journey of users to help them find the information they need via things like chatbots. And also to come up and develop use cases and determine the optimal service interactions of chatbots with users. And also to refine and improve chatbot usability. And finally, deployment of chatbots that focuses squarely on the needs of the user. So there's some real opportunities here, though. Again, new areas to explore, new areas for growth. One is for feeding the chatbot. So you have useful answers from a chatbot can come only from accurate source content. Tech docs can be a primary source for this. Also, training the chatbot. It's not just about giving it content. It also has to be trained to extract the correct answers that's embedded in it. And also co-creating communications going forward. So with its wealth of built-in conversational data, AI can help make improved content. There's some very interesting examples I've seen where it's being helped to assist writers to come up with content. It's also been shown to improve things like search engine optimization and bring or be a single voice for corporate communications. And that, as I say, is it.
Thank you, Katie. So we have enough time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, and I see a hand up. I see 2 hands up. I will make it towards you in the closest order, because I am very clumsy.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's such a nice presentation. I think it's one of the first set of critical presentations on the future of chatbots, because these days people are still mesmerized by it. So thank you, and I'm very invested in the topic because it touches on some of my projects. I think you've answered my first question in terms of opportunities and the costs to labor and what skills as IA and content people we can develop. But can you maybe touch a bit on the plagiarism, right? What kind of in future, what kind of content would be fed into this chatbot? Where would it be sourced? And what is the risk of plagiarizing content from actual authors?
Okay, this is a subject that's near and dear to me, because as an occasional lecturer and professor at the UT, you want to make sure that essays that are handed in are in fact handed by your students and not by a clever IA. Now, I think we have entered the beginning of what is going to be a long-standing battle/war for things like chatbots that can do essays, and there are now programs out there that know how to spot the rhythms that are present in the current chatbots to discern whether or not something, like a sample of text, is in fact written by or aided by a chat GPT, for example. So I think there's going to be like an ongoing battle, kind of like viruses and antivirus programs from this point on, looking at, it's like, was this written by a person or not, and then ongoing checks to see how things, things go on from this point. There's a lovely case I ran across very recently of a student in a high school somewhere in the States complaining that his teacher was that my essay was written by a bot, and it's like, no, it wasn't. And one of the responses came back: use this particular program to show the teacher that the evidence is there, it wasn't actually done by a bot. But as I say, we're just at the very beginning of that sort of thing, and I'm sure we're going to be, it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. I'll just add, in that I think that may be the wrong way to go about things. Okay, I don't know how much time I have. I just want to say that I think a new skill for students of the near future will be learning to use chatbots effectively to help them write more effectively. I mean, especially for those for whom English is a second language. In some ways, it just makes sense. I've spent so much time, and I certainly have graded down, responses from people who have not thoroughly edited or looked at their own content, to make sure that it's up to professional standards from a reading level. And I don't think I have enough time left, but yeah.
No problem, and I want to make sure I get to Rob, if we can do a quick 30-second one here.
Sure, I'd just like to, at Precision Content, we've been studying ChatGPT now for the last couple of months, and its impact and its opportunities and threats. It is disruptive technology, unlike anything we've seen since probably the web, quite frankly. And but understanding what we see today, the publicly trained model, which sources information from no later than 2021, and understanding that we can't directly train or influence the publicly trained model, and that we need to be looking to create our own models instead. So just could you comment on that? And sort of
there's a difference there between so there's the conversational model, so which is you're quite right, but then there's also the model for feeding information into the system that is more factually based. So if I'm looking at it from my perspective of being in a semiconductor firm, we want to make sure that the conversational interface is there so that it can speak to users, but also to provide them with very specific data, so that if someone is saying, I'm having a problem with this resistor setting on this Radeon card, what do I do? And then, if the chatbot doesn't have the specific information on, to identify that card and the things that go wrong, it can't respond accordingly. That is a big business risk. Mm-hmm. So I think to address your question, it comes down to doing a lot of training work and making sure that, and also testing to make sure that the responses that you can expect people to ask of it are accurate. And again, the business risks for when that is inaccurate are huge, which is again why I think chatbots still have a fair way to before they become dominant, if in fact they become dominant. Oh yeah, everybody become dominant, definitely for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to invite Michael Priestley up to set up. And I hope everybody is cataloging a couple of questions for the panel, because we are going to have a much more in-depth discussion at the end of the day. So keep those questions written down or in your head, and be ready to ask them when that happens. Next up, we have Michael Priestley. Michael Priestley is an information architect, a taxonomist, and content architect focused on the intersection of semantic content, user experience, and SEO at enterprise scale. Michael has experience working with and across marketing, sales, training, documentation, and support content, coordinating requirements, and delivering common processes and standards. He was named as an Oasis Distinguished Contributor for his development of the data content standard. Another round of applause, please, for Michael.
Thank you. And is this coming through okay? Or can you hear me at the back? Yeah. Great. So first question, how many folks here are working in marketing? Okay, so there's a couple of my peeps here. I started in TechCom, and then sort of a while back, I sort of gradually found a new home. And my current job is in marketing at Avalara, reorganizing their B2B software as a service sort of company website. But I'm definitely not just concerned with the marketing side of things, but I just want to understand, folks to understand where I'm coming from and what this is in the context of. Next question, how many folks here took transit to get here today? Yeah, okay. So hopefully at least the metaphor is going to strike home, and when transit works well, it lets you get where you need to go. It doesn't sort of force you to go, just you start here, there's only one destination. There's many different destinations you could be going. And that's really what I want to talk about is, there's a tendency, especially in marketing, to sometimes think of a buyer's journey as being very linear. They talk about a funnel, they talk about a buyer's journey. All of these things are indicative of a single target point that you are leading people to by the nose, and that actually isn't the way people work in reality. And hopefully we can talk a little bit, sort of talk through some of the implications of that. And so, starting up with this, the simple line of the user journey is that it's linear in one way. And there's this lovely idea that, I have a problem. Oh, I'm gonna Google it. I came to your website. Oh, you've got a solution for it. I'm gonna buy it. Yay, there's docs. I'm happy, I'm productive. I'm gonna, tell people how great and awesome you are. And we've got content that supports these different things. And we, if we're lucky, we have links between these pieces of content that lead them through this journey. Calls to action links, or CTAs, and they are supposed to work, and they are supposed to lead to this inevitable moment of joy where they are happy and productive and using our product because they bought it and got money. The messy truth, this is from an article a few years back from Think with Google, and it's such a beautiful graphic that I'm stealing from their article, and the only thing I don't like about it is how unmessy that graphic is. The words, I think, are better in that they say, we know what happens between the trigger, what sort of brings them to sort of your set of possibilities, your content, and the purchase decision making. It's not linear. We know there's a complicated web of touch points that differs from person to person. So, sort of, what the graphic does illustrate, though, is that it roughly divides into exploration activity and evaluation activity. And in any given sort of purchase sort of journey, there's actually going to be some time spent exploring, and then, oh, this looks like it might be interesting, this might help me. I'm going to spend some time evaluating that. Maybe that's not quite right, I'm going back to explore, then I come back to evaluate, maybe the same thing, maybe a different thing. And this cycle might repeat a few times, but there are definite spaces around exploration and evaluation that we can define. So if we think about what's in those spaces, and start from that sort of question of like, what is the X that they're trying to understand, or what is the product for X that they're trying to evaluate? There is content that we could sort of think of in terms of its subject that meets some of those needs. We've got guides to X, blog posts, customer stories, events, solution pages that all might be relevant to a customer's interest in a particular subject. We've also got on the product side, we've got product pages, demos, partners who can work with you to implement or support or integrate the product, developer content for the people who are going to be programming integrations or programming against APIs for the product, the actual product docs, the training, maybe some trial opportunities. So, I didn't want to do that. I want to do that. So how easy do we make it for people to explore and evaluate? Well, that content, for understanding a particular subject, the guides might live under a resources menu on the marketing site. The blog posts have their own section of the site. The customer stories have their own section. The events have their own section. The solution pages don't have their own section. They're just free floating under the site menu. And so all of the stuff related to X, you are going to be jumping to another menu, drilling down. going to another menu, drilling down, going to another menu, drilling down. Or much more likely, you're gonna go back to Google. And every time you go back to Google, remember these are not product-specific searches happening to bring you to, through this exploration phase. We're not searching for a product, we're not evaluating a product. We're trying to understand a problem area. We're trying to understand something in my environment that is giving me a sense of either opportunity or threat, and I want to act on it. Every time I go back to Google, the chances that I land on someone else's site increases. So from a marketing perspective, this should scare you. Now, once they start evaluating the product, the good news is they're searching for that product. So if they're searching, or actually to be fair, they might be searching for like just a solution, which is going to lead them back to the left-hand side of this equation. But once they're actually evaluating a specific product, hopefully they will Google and land on your site. And then the question is which site? Are they going to land on the marketing site, or the partner site, or the developer site, or the doc site, or the training site? It's not even the same site menu anymore in many cases. We might have completely different experiences with no obvious way to navigate between them. So the good news is they are looking for just you. You're not competing with other companies, probably, except for the paid position at the top of the Google search result that says if you're finding it difficult to evaluate that product because the information is spread across multiple sites, why don't you just take a moment and interrupt that journey and come back to us, and us being your competitor. So again, the fact that you're making the evaluation experience difficult and fragmented directly interrupts the user journey and creates an opportunity for competition to just steal and interrupt that evaluation process. So how could we make it easier? First off, have a site menu that does actually span all this stuff and gives you fast access. But underneath that site menu, here's where the big change comes. Having exploration-focused menus for each major topic or group of topics, and evaluation-focused menus for each product that you sell, or a set of closely related products. So when we look at what would go under a topic menu, it might be learn content, solution content, along with some resource hubs that can give them sort of access to some of the shared assets, things like blog posts or events or customer stories that might apply to one or more, or to two or more topics, or two or more products. And the same thing with the product menu. We want to be collecting together under that menu stuff that lets them understand the product, see it working, understand the actual capabilities, the documentation. And again, you can have a resource hub page that just summarizes and provides links out to the customer stories or events that are relevant, that are still living under their own menu because they're serving many different topics and product sort of contexts. So a couple of examples, and I've been at Avalara for just about exactly a year. We managed to deploy a couple of topic menus for some areas that we knew we had interest in and we had product for. The top one is, I know the display here is tough to read with the light. So the top one, we've got an Avalara site menu with solutions, products, resources, partners, kind of like pretty standard B2B drop downs across the top. And then a second level menu right underneath it. In the top level, it's business licenses. In the second case, it's sales and use tax. And Avalara is a company that provides basically compliance solutions for businesses around things like taxes and licenses. So these are obvious things that people could be interested in, and we now have menus that organize the content around those interests. And we didn't before. A lot of the content that sits under sales and use tax previously sat under a resources menu or it was either a resources menu or nothing for the most part. But we started grabbing the content that was relevant to this interest area and putting it under the same menu. And why do we start with menus? And I wanted to make it clear, this was 6 months into the company. I was, as a taxonomist, trying to figure out what all the different topic areas were. And I have this terrible sort of terrifying Figma file that is just like a giant sort of wall of tiny blocks of colored text that link together, and I call it the spider web. And that led to the decision to create, like sort of, okay, we can see we've got a cluster of related topics and capabilities around business licenses. We can see we've got one around sales and use tax. We've got a solution page in each case that we could use to anchor an experience. We've got enough content that I feel we could probably create a menu fast. Why did I want to start with a menu? Because we could do it without rewriting all the content. So I could say, let's create a new menu component, let's slap it on top of these pages. We don't have to rewrite anything. We don't have to sort of find room for a new set of related links. We can do it fast. It's also easy for users to find. It can immediately impact user experience. People know what a menu is, they know what it looks like, and it's not a new or a weird sort of capability. It doesn't take up a lot of room, but it provides a lot of access. And it also can act as a wayfinding technique. It tells people where they are by underlining the drop down for where they would find the current page. So no matter which page brought them there, they can see, oh, okay, I can see all the other stuff that's available, and I can see how to get back to this page if I jump around. And it also tells user where they can go next, because regardless, again, of what page brought them there, there's a set of related pages under those drop downs that give them access to potentially the next thing they would be looking for if they went back to Google. So we're trying to sort of save them a trip to Google, keep them sort of focused on the content that we can give them that is going to be helpful to them, and make it so easy for them to find that they don't have to leave. It also, speaking of having to leave, tells Google that we have coverage for this subject. And one of the impacts of this is things like search rank. And just the structure of the way results are displayed on Google actually can be changed by your menu structure. And finally, it's easy to scale. Like, if we wanted to get into reorganizing our whole site's menu structure, folder structure, that could wreck us. It has all sorts of implications. It's often the first thing that people think of when they think about IA in a website. Oh, we're going to reorganize the folder structure. I am terrified of doing that. I know it's going to wreck our SEO. It's going to wreck every redirect. It's going to, so many things are going to be impacted by that, from analytics to experience. But I can change the menu structure. I can even apply the same menu across multiple sites, not even just multiple folder structures. And the user is not going to be terribly confused by the fact that the folder structure doesn't reflect the menu structure. But the menu structure can then serve those user needs more directly and more quickly. And if I want to, I can reorganize other parts of the site later. But if I can start with the menus, I can move a lot of user behavior and support better their journey with minimal impact to other parts of the organization. So how legible is that? Not terribly. I wanted to just show the principles that I was using to create a topic-oriented menu. So I had the menu home, a solution page, a couple of high-level learn things under general. Let me just the one thing I was trying to standardize is cluster of information to the left. How many people are familiar with the term pillar page or topic clustering? Okay, I got one hand. Quick summary, this is an SEO term. The basic principle is if you're trying to drive traffic or awareness in Google about a subject, having a central page that goes deep on that subject and then a whole bunch of more specific pages that link back, so it establishes the relevance and authority of that central page. That central page is what they call a pillar page, and that topic clustering technique, which is a blog technique for ranking blog articles, is very portable. And a variation of this is to say, let's not just have a pillar page for a topic, but let's talk about what people are actually interested in, relevant. What's their intent relative to that topic? Like, do they want to? And this is that idea of search intent is another SEO term, and some of the standard values are informational, navigational, transactional, sometimes commercial. So in this case, we've got relative to this topic, let's make sure we've got a guide, or an FAQ, or a 101 kind of content for that topic, and make sure that that's in this menu. Let's also make sure that there's a resources hub that can provide, oh, actually, I did this in the other order. I got to follow the order that I thought I would be doing. So we've got a solution page here that talks about the ways we can help you, and this is your pillar page for commercial intent. So if someone's searching for sales tax solutions or sales tax software or sales tax automation. We want to be landing them here. And then we have the resources hub, which is the pillar page for navigational intent. Like, they don't know what they're looking for, they just want everything we have, like sales tax resources. We don't know, or if it's just sales and use tax, like we don't know what the intent is. We don't know if they're looking for software, or if they're looking for case studies, or if they're looking for education. So we want to get them to a page that gives them access to a lot of different choices. We also have a common pattern in Avalara is that we have a lot of regional resources, because tax compliance or licensing compliance can vary from country to country or state to state or county to county or zip code to zip code. So there's a ton of information we have that is, like, from a search perspective, really long tail content, but drives in aggregate a ton of traffic. Like nearly the majority of traffic to the site is this kind of regional content. And then we have sort of our actual products. And if they're simple products, there's not a lot to say about it. We might actually have them live directly under the same menu as the topic. Maybe we have an implementation resources page that can link out to related docs and training if we can't bring them under the same menu. And finally, we have the related solutions. So if we can't cover everything under the same menu, we got, part of this clustering work is figuring out when can we say everything about a subject under one menu, when is there too much, and it's a bit of a jump, or it's a shared set of information that's common to other clusters. And that sort of chunking work is sort of part of what was happening in my spider work with related content. But this related section at the end is how I sort of compensate for that and say, okay, I'm not going to discuss everything about business licensing under sales and use tax, but we know that you might need both, so here's a link to the other. So now connecting the, I called that cleverly, I thought, connecting the dots. If we now think about connecting the lines, if we want to cover more than one user journey, effectively under the same menu, because the journeys are closely connected, then we can do that. And basically, we have the same sort of pillar pages anchoring the whole menu. But then we also have, under each drop-down now, we have a sort of, each one has its own subtopic journey, where we have, a guide, resources, potentially some regional content, and then we can, that shifted a little bit unfortunately, but that should be under the solution page, and that might link out to multiple different product menus, each with their own sort of evaluation-focused menu. Or we might have one that, if we don't need a solution page, we might link out directly to the product from there. And again, the same sort of related solution content. So now if we talk about how is this doing, because the nice thing is we did this 6 months ago. So we've got at least some data in the months sort of following the deployment of the menus. How did they work? And I mean, we had research going in about what people were clicking on next, what kind of traffic, sort of, people who were starting their journey on the site, where were they going, how were they getting there? A lot of the journeys were starting with the regional content, right? People would do things like query, what's the sales tax rate in Kentucky? Or what's the sales tax rate in Seattle? And that would start their journey on our site. We have good answers to that. We're a site with a lot of authority around that information, and we keep it up to date. And so where do they go next? Well, the first thing is, once those pages landed under a topic focus menu instead of a resources menu, engagement with the menu went up by 40%, which I don't know how many folks have seen sort of engagement studies. Double-digit changes in engagement are amazing. Like if you see a 10% increase, that's fantastic. A 40% increase, I don't think I'd ever seen that before. I was ecstatic and shocked. The other thing is we had a CTA leading them to a relevant product. Once we added a set of related products in that menu, it wasn't just the one product anymore. Traffic to the products as a whole under that menu went up by about 30% from the sub-regional content. So giving them contextual access to those products, even though we were really from the very start of the journey, hey, I'm just looking for a tax rate, to a product, like that's like the end of the journey. 30% increase in how many people were making that jump. Now, the actual guide content, which is a much more relevant, like, okay, you know, sort of you're looking at sales tax, maybe you want to find out, like, what is the, maybe I should understand the sales tax implications, or, like, you know, what triggers a reporting threshold requirement. Those are things I might logically be interested in. I say plus 100%. That's actually, I should say, at least 100% increase in traffic. In some cases, it was like 800% increase. Just providing access to those links, which previously were there, but they were in a resources menu and buried and like 3 clicks down. And now they were right there. You could see how they were related to the topic that brought me to the site. So at least 100% increase on the guide or learn content from that regional sort of just look up data starting point. And then finally, the solution homepage, over 250% increase in traffic from that regional content. And that's the one that lays out all the different ways we can help them with sales and use tax. And so multiple products positioned against their potential need. And again, we're not talking just a minor jump. We're talking 250% increase in traffic from the pages that were the major drivers of organic traffic to our site. In terms of that organic traffic, that also went up. So for the solution page specifically, 30% increase in traffic directly from Google. I don't have handy the numbers to sort of give you total impact, but I suspect that the referral traffic from the regional pages probably is bigger than the direct organic traffic. So, but that's just my suspicion. So the net is, we tried this. This was like, we have a theory, this is gonna work if we provide information that's more focused to what they're looking for and interested in, then it'll impact user behavior and help people, and it did. So yay. I'm really looking forward to the next iteration on this menu and deploying more of them. Just, yeah, 2 warnings, numbers are approximate, and past performance is no guarantee of future results. So, yeah. Now, last point, we talked about, like, it's really easy to publish your org chart and just sort of put stuff into the different sites and the different menus. To get past the org chart, you have to go through the org chart. So to get that top menu working, we were collaborating across content marketing, product marketing, audience marketing. To get out more menus, all of us have to agree on what the menus are and what the priorities are and who needs to do what to fill the gaps under each menu. For the product menu, it's even more challenging. You know, we're not just talking about different parts of marketing, it's also product, docs, training, support, product experience as well, coordinating on what could lead them there and how we're talking about the problem domain. And then in these shared resources like blogs and events and customer stories, anytime we talk about a topic or a product, we got to make sure that we are drawing from common taxonomy and classifying stuff so that it can pop up in those hub or resources pages under the appropriate product menu or topic menu. And that is it. And yeah, looking forward to questions.
Thank you very much. I hate to say it, but we only have time for one question, and I see one hand up. If there's anybody else, you'll have to fight for it. Sorry, I'm just going to skip past here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vic.
Hi, Michael. I love that you were able to tell a story about the business value that you're providing to your company. And for those of us who are maybe less experienced working with quant data, I would love some advice about how to work with stakeholders around getting the data you need to benchmark your success, or how much time you personally go after that data. I would just love to hear more about that.
Gotcha. And so this is, I think that's going to vary so much depending upon your organization, but making friends with your SEO team and your analytics team, absolutely key to this. They did their own analytics on this, and I borrowed it. They were excited to share the story. And it wasn't easy, I want to add, because we don't have metadata yet on those pages to group them the way that we're doing. So they had to manually sort of select all the pages with under the different folder structures that fed into this menu, and then figure out the aggregate. It was a piece of work, but they were excited to do it, and they did it on their own initiative. And then I'm the beneficiary beneficiary of it. So part of it is making friends with them and coordinating on it, making clear that you are their ally and you want their outcomes to work better. And so that's key, right? It's just making it clear that your success is mutual. Aside from that, the other thing, sort of almost a parallel, but the research side of this, we had a lot of analytics that did not support doing this at all. Because of course the research was based on the existing site structure. So if we looked at sort of how are people using the site today, what are they going to? It wouldn't have said to add those things. The only thing, we had a CTA going to product, we knew that was the most traffic next link. And that link is still in that menu, but it's certainly not the most prominent one. And it's not the one that benefited the most from traffic. So I think the existing site structure, if it's not already topic oriented, can be a red herring, and you can over-research it. So I was lucky I had the support to throw this out there as basically a test. Sort of based on a very plausible hypothesis with backing from SEO as, yes, this makes sense, with backing from content strategy. I got all these groups on side to do this. But now we've got data that we can start folding in and evolving it and optimizing it. But we had to start with a big plausible guess that we had enough people on side for.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. One more round of applause for Michael, please. I would like to welcome everybody back with Trevor as our next speaker. He's going to be a lightning speaker. Trevor is a master's student studying user experience design at the Faculty of Information at the University of Toronto. His general research interests are accessibility and designing for marginalized individuals. Trevor is currently conducting his thesis project on designing websites structures for older adults under the supervision of Dr. Olivier Sitsier.
Hello. Hey. Okay. All right, thanks. Yeah, so the name of my talk today is Wayfinding with Age, Information, Architecture, Preferences Among Older Adults. So that's good. I introduced myself. I guess I'll just say, so my interest in this topic generally stems from a research project I worked on with the Public Health Agency of Canada, where in collaboration with an organization called Cyber Seniors, we developed a set of dementia awareness content, so the videos and text information, sort of to just spread awareness to older adults about dementia and some of the risk factors for it and sort of what you can do about those risk factors. So today I'm going to go through older adults as a user group, and sort of why you should care about them. I'll talk about their preferences for website or application structure, and then I'll talk a bit about information and structure tailoring. So as for older adults as a user group, older adults can be described in a lot of different ways, right? Typically we think of them as people over the age of 65, sometimes different numbers are used. It could be 50, could be 70, could just be anybody who's retired, which sort of begs the question, why should they be considered like as a distinct user group? And what's actually interesting about older adults is that they face a unique combination of physical, cognitive, and digital literacy challenges, sort of with extra emphasis on that combination of challenges. In particular, there's been some research done that shows that when you do research with older and older segments of the population, what you find is that sort of the results of that research, or the results of studies, sort of increases in variability the older and older the population segment we look at. So that makes an older adults particularly informative when you do research with them, and it also means that when you can make something work for this population segment, it's likely to work for a sort of a large swath of the population as well. And so what are these challenges that older adults face? Well, they could be things like physical challenges, so visual impairments, make it hard to find navigation elements or read text on a screen. It could be a decline of motor skills, which can make it hard to do things like click and drag or press multiple keys at the same time. There's cognitive challenges, so this is generally a decline in what's called working memory, also sometimes called short-term memory, that make them more likely to go back to the same page over and over again when trying to do something, or just become disoriented when going through a website or application. And finally, there are information literacy challenges. And in terms of website structure or information architecture, this typically manifests in a lack of familiarity with generally accepted design elements. So things like a left arrow being used as a back button when it isn't labeled, or a plus being used to upload a document. So people may not be familiar with some of those general principles. And so what role does the structure of a website or application play in addressing some of these challenges? Well, generally, the application or website structure can have the biggest impact in terms of cognitive and digital literacy challenges. And so I'll get into how that works. So when thinking about sort of the traditional website structures, I don't know how easy it is to see here, but you have hierarchical, linear, and sort of a matrix structure, and what the research shows is generally hierarchical structures tend to perform the worst with older adults. And there's a variety of reasons for this, particularly when thinking about people with some form of cognitive decline. Sort of internalizing some of those nested categories can be a challenge, and also it becomes difficult to sort of get back to where you were a second or third time once you've gotten there once. And so this has sort of emerged out of quite a few studies, and then there's also been quite a bit of research sort of just comparing linear and matrix structured websites and applications. For example, here's one study that looked at an email web client. So they designed it in two different ways, one with sort of linear tasks and one where everything was sort of based around one central page that sort of linked to everything else individually. And what this study found was that the linear structure actually performed the best with older adults, particularly in terms of both their performance, like their ability to complete tasks and how quickly they were able to do it, and also just their general preference, their sort of their attitudes towards the two different sites. And so what are the benefits? Like why do these results tend to appear? Well, some of the thoughts around this are first that linear websites or applications provide a more familiar experience. So this is speaking to those information literacy challenges. If you think of some people who are maybe more familiar with print media, books or magazines tend to go in a linear order. Even if you're not reading page by page, you still tend to search for or flip through things in a linear order. And so websites that sort of mimic that are more familiar. Additionally, it offers a lower cognitive load, right? If you're just going sort of in one direction, there's only really one decision or two decisions to make. Do you want to go forward or backward? Obviously there can be like a home button or a menu and those kinds of things, but generally the decision you're making is just forward or back. And last is linear websites clearly segment information, either page by page or sort of in more defined categorical sections. And this actually leads to better information retention and also makes it easier to leave the website and come back later and sort of know where you are. And so I suppose I could stop there, but I did start by talking about how older adults are an incredibly diverse population, so that sort of begs the question, how can I recommend this? Why can I say this is always the best option? And more recent research has actually shown that, while linear websites do work very well, they're not always the best option. There are varying preferences, like I sort of talked about. For example, it can depend on somebody's information needs. So people with higher information needs, or older adults with higher information needs, prefer that linear structure, whereas people with lower information needs maybe prefer a more hypertext-based or matrix-style structure. And the higher information needs typically prefer the linear structure because it allows them to sort of guarantee that they see everything, right? And additionally, information needs or just some of these preferences can also change depending on the content on a website or application, the task they're trying to do, or their intention with a particular website or app. Is it their first time going there, or is it maybe the fifth time they're going to that website? And last, most of this research still sort of supports that hierarchical designs just don't perform the best for older adults. And so, as practitioners, what can you do with this information now that I've just said that it depends? Well, one thought around this is something called information and structure tailoring, which basically says, don't make a decision for people, let them choose themselves. So it's this notion, and tailoring can also be called personalization or customization, but this is the term they typically choose in this space. So this basically says, let people choose how they navigate through content in between pages. So here's a very blatant example. Basically offers two different ways. You can go through a set of content, and at the bottom there's a way to switch between those two ways. Now again, this is a very blatant, very obvious way to do this. There's more subtle ways, and I think some like education websites, like Udemy or things like that, have something like this or something similar to this. So websites that allow or applications that allow for structured tailoring, they're more flexible, and they allow the user experience to be more flexible, which accommodates a plurality of users and use cases without trying to find some universal perfect solution. And additionally, it creates a more engaging experience, right? Users have more control, and when people feel like they have more control, that typically improves how they view the website as a whole or view the application as a whole. And additionally, there's also some evidence that when somebody's more engaged with a set of content or with a website or application, that can actually help counteract diminished cognitive abilities, which, like I mentioned, is particularly important for older adults. And so allowing them to tailor or really choose how they go through a set of content can also make that content more valuable to them and make them more valuable users of your website. I'll just have a quick summary. Older adults are not a homogeneous group, and this is in particular what makes them most valuable when doing research. And then it makes them an incredibly important demographic to consider. Website structure and information architecture play a role and play an important role in accessibility. They address some of the lesser considered challenges that some people may face. Linearly structured websites often are the best for older adults. However, one structure is not always perfect, and not always perfect for everybody at all times. And so consider how you can give people choices in how they navigate through content and navigate through websites, and consider how that can improve their experience and make the content more engaging. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we have enough time for one question, and then I'll maybe run up to you.
Hi Trevor, thanks so much. My name's Kitty, so I'm a nurse by background, and I'm currently working at SC Health, which our population of focus is on older adults, especially in the community. So with the rise of digital and virtual care, I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on the applicability of the linear or matrix structuring on beyond the web, so on like applications or other forms of older adults may use?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the majority of the research in this area, so because of how funding structures work, typically relates to conveying like educating older adults, right? Like obviously the project I worked on was about that, right? And so lots of other research, because that's what the government funds, is about things like conveying information about healthcare or about sort of these different types of things. There's lots of research on smoking cessation. That's not just for older adults. So definitely in applications it does sort of prove effective, especially when you're trying to convey information, right? When they can sort of see that they're going through a particular task, or they sort of know what they can do right now and where they can come back later. That's where I think, especially when you're trying to educate people or get older adults to sort of learn or retain information, that ability to stop and then remember where they were when they come back and sort of pick up where they left off is where there's a big benefit there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. One more round of applause for Trevor, please. Can I please get Grace to come up and start preparing? Thank you. So Grace has a passion for prioritizing people, pinpointing problems, and perfecting products. As a UX designer, she has previously served vulnerable populations at UC San Diego and Matrix Care Inc., with a focus on accessibility and digital well-being. After completing her Master of Information at U of T, she pivoted to finance with RBC and now works to help CIBC's clients realize their ambitions. Please welcome Grace.
Hello. All right. Hi everyone. Happy Post Friday. So I'm Grace Chen. I'm a UX designer at CIBC Investors Edge, and today I'm going to tell you the story about how our team researched information architecture and how it's paying off today. So before we dive in, a little bit about CIBC Investors Edge. So basically, in a nutshell, Investors Edge is a quote-unquote self-directed brokerage that lets people buy and sell investments by themselves. So during the pandemic, you might remember, like surge of popularity in crypto, stocks like GameStop and AMC, things like that. And people traded those on brokerages like Simple, Robinhood, and Investors Edge. So on these brokerage platforms, we support users through a variety of tasks centered around learning, trading, and monitoring. And so learning kind of encompasses growing our users' financial literacy with investing, so helping them understand like what trading is, how to kind of learn all the different account types, things like that, helping them figure out what to invest in and what strategies to use. Trading involves every transaction that happens on the site, so how users buy and sell, stocks, ETFs, mutual funds, etc., or move money around different accounts and institutions. And finally, monitoring, so helping users understand how their portfolios are performing and whether their strategies are working for them in the short term and long term. So, over the past year, my team and I learned a lot about the importance of situating the user at the right place, the right time, with the right affordances. And so, this is kind of where our project began. As you can see here, I don't know how clear it is, but basically, different parts of our site navigation supported learning about investing using the platform. So you can see help is kind of highlighted at the top right. We have quotes and research for learning about different companies. And then the learn under the more menu to kind of support learning about the platform. Trading here is limited to trades, orders, cash transfers, and in this original state, all other transfers and account-related transactions were located under preferences, which I will touch on in a few slides. And finally, for monitoring, users could view their holdings and performance and all their other account details under account information. I don't know how well you can see the highlights here, but there you go. So overall, this was chugging along mostly fine. But there were still a few roadblocks that made it less than ideal, things that tripped users up a little bit, especially as we were starting to digitize more of our processes and add new features to the platform. So essentially, this whole project was kind of an amalgamation of whole different parts of other projects, and we finally decided we needed to kind of relook at the information architecture and make it work better for the future. So what were some of the roadblocks? So the first up was the navigation bar itself. So some of these main navigation items are single pages. Some of them have some menus, but at a glance, it's very hard to tell what you get before you click on each menu item. And here you can see that the second level navigation is actually horizontal and lives right under the main navigation. So this design does save a lot of screen real estate, but we did find during user testing that newer users tended to kind of skip over this and over all these secondary menus, since they weren't a very common design pattern. And then you can kind of see it kind of blends in a little bit with this main navigation up here. The next roadblock we faced was the nomenclature. So there were a few ambiguous terms we had to sort out. So for instance, most transfers related pages were under preferences. Like Constance said, everything gets kind of tossed into the junk drawer. And this kind of made them very hard to find both for our users and our developers. And secondly, the term accounts could refer to either users' investment accounts or their actual Investors Edge platform account, which also made the preferences page very confusing to kind of go through and look, do you want to link your brokerage account? Do you want to set up your account password? What are these things referring to? And aside from these terms, there's also this growing pressure from other fintechs and competitors and the growing new investing generations to kind of modernize and simplify the overall language that we used. So transfers could mean like move money, fund an account, all these different things that relate to our users' mental models, essentially. And finally, our icons were in this whole state of disarray. So we had a sort of assortment of all these menus on the site, each one with a different like open and close icon, like ellipses, those dot dots, and chevrons. And these kind of inconsistencies with signage made it very difficult for users to figure out what would happen once they clicked on it, and difficult for us to move forwards with designs involving any sections that could be open or closed. So you can see there's this X icon, there's closed menu, close, there's just, everything was a little bit inconsistent. So we needed a game plan, and so we came up with this 4-step plan that is currently in progress. So I can't speak or show everything right now. So things will be a little bit general, so bear with me. All right. But the first step was basically dealing with navigation. So this was in the form of hoverable mega menus. So basically, users could peek under each menu item at a glance without having to click through the actual navigation. So you can see that here in the green. I don't know if I can see it, but that trading. Once you hover over that, you can see like stocks and ETFs, mutual funds, etc. Yes, the next step, which we're currently in the process of implementing, was the general cleanup of the Google header and revamping the preferences page. So if you look back here above the main navigation, you can kind of see all this junk up here in the top right corner. There's a lot of links, a lot of layers, everything's kind of fighting for your attention. And there's just a lot to look at overall. So for that, we cleaned it up here. So as you can see, we removed a lot of the redundant links and just kind of folded everything up into a more minimalistic look, just to focus the user's attention on the main navigation itself. And for the preferences page, we're also bundling it with other site features like forms and profile details, kind of like a one-stop shop for account management, rather than having all these different features and functions scattered around the site. In the next phase, I can't show you anything, but basically we're tackling this content and label cleanup to remove redundancy, so those accounts, and basically overall just make sure that we're still speaking a user's language. And related to the preferences page, we're also moving our transfers from there to place in the main navigation for better findability. And finally, phase 4 is just making sure that the actions the users are most interested in taking are there like every step of the site. So similar to what Trevor Cross mentioned, kind of like a more matrix style site where everything kind of intersects, and making sure that every action is elevated at the right moment. And one thing to note is that top right corner cleanup actually requires a lot of heavy lifting in the background. So at first it seems very easy, just like strip everything, it's fine. But we also needed to update all the content pointing to those links, including the FAQs, all the contact centers. Basically, we also needed to inform our call center about making sure they pass along the right information to users, just making sure no one was really confused about where all these links went. So in the meantime, we're making progress on the rest of the roadmap, so exciting times are ahead for Mesor's Edge. So a few things that we learned. First, surface the relevant and hide the irrelevant. As UX and content designers, our job is to make the obvious things obvious. Sometimes that's done by highlighting what's needed, sometimes that's done through shoving all the clutter back in the closet. And so we made this happen with our hover menus and transfers pages. So basically ask yourselves what's hidden and what should it be, what are users trying to find, and how can you help without throwing a whole whale of information at them. Secondly, lay out the red carpet. So basically give users the next best step at each key point, but don't be afraid if they want to step off to explore an interesting storefront. So basically, providing signage that users understand can be very frustrating to figure out sometimes, but it's very satisfying when you finally get it right. And last but not least, stay vigilant. So consider your changes and anticipate as many consequences as you can. Kind of figure out what other areas or parts of the business this will impact, Think about the timescales. Will this make sense in 6 months, 6 years? How will this feature or solution work with other features coming down the line? And so basically, to be future-proof, make the present a past worth having. And so that brings me to the end of this case study. So thank you for listening, and I'll pass it back to Joe.
So we have time for one question for Grace. Is there anybody who wants to ask? Oh, I saw your hand go up a little. Okay.
Thank you, Grace. My question is around co-design. So I've been hearing a lot in the design and innovation thinking space about incorporating end users in each step of the design process. So when it comes to redesigning the Investor's Edge platform, just wondering if you've incorporated the feedback of any end users in the process, or will that be part of the testing phase when you launch?
Oh yes, so I totally left out all the user research we went through. So basically, this project was kind of, as I mentioned before, like an amalgamation of a whole bunch of other projects. So for example, so each aspect of the IA was kind of touched on in different aspects. So for example, with the icons, we did like surveys, we did usability tests. With these other things, we did like user interviews. Sometimes when we're testing the transfers page, we would touch on that during the usability tests. So there was definitely a lot of like continuous process and testing going on at each point. And yeah, we do plan to continue testing the reception and the launch of this once it's all rolled out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause for Grace, please. At this point, I'd like to invite our volunteers up to help set up for the panel, and I'd like to invite all the speakers to come up for the panel. And I hope everyone has questions ready to go, because this is your chance to ask the panel anything, for the panel to ask each other anything, and for the panel to ask you anything.
Hi, my name is Anna Wheeler, and thank you all. Enjoyed all of your talks, and something that in my last role as a tech writer running a knowledge base, have you had experience where the tech writing teams are perhaps less involved than they should be, and this is presented, all these navigation changes, changes to the UI, this sort of thing? I found that I was often the recipient of, hey, here it is, and I was a team of one. You've got 2,000 pages to change all the navigation, and oh, we decided to change this green triangle to a blue square. So all the references had to be updated, all the graphics had to be updated, and this was not a system that streamlined any of that, so it was a manual process. Are there companies that are doing it right and, say, increasing the team capacities for the tech writing teams? That's just sort of my first question. I know it's a bit of a narrow one, but I love the idea of all the navigation changes and making it better. Just wondering about the whole team.
Who wants to answer that first?
I can jump in first if you want. Yeah, so I know that for my team, the editorial team does work very closely with the UX team. And so for us, it is kind of that co-creation process. We bring them in to make sure that we're testing the right terms. And it's kind of like an equal exchange of ideas. I know that do sometimes get very frustrated with the level of consistency they have to maintain, because sometimes decisions will get tossed back to them and then be like, they have to update all the knowledge-based things, as I mentioned. But for the most part, we do try our best to streamline everything and make sure that they are updated at every step of the process.
Alrighty, so yeah, I wish I could give you a pure technical writer answer. I've been a technical writer. I feel your pain, and I think my answer is similar in that my experience right now is working with more sort of on the editorial front, not necessarily product documentation, but sort of the more sort of the pre-sales. Okay, actually, I shouldn't be speaking for you. I think you were actually talking with actual customers. But what I can say is relative to working with content authors, and some of our content strategy folks, our content authors, really are like it's still technical content. You know, sort of someone's offering a tax guide for like you know, sort of aimed at sort of accountant level tax fluency. Like, it may not be product specific, it may be part of the marketing team, but there's still very technical people performing technical content tasks. And I can say that as we were rolling out the kinds of navigational changes we did, it was absolutely in partnership with those content experts who knew the subject matter much better than us and whose content was going to be surfaced there. And every step from user research through piloting, through deployment, onto like the taxonomy review, and all of that was done first with the content people. And that's what I would like to see, that you know, sort of all the way through. That yeah, you don't make a change to the UX as if it's something that matters with their content. You know, its job is to help people get to the stuff that they need. So if you don't have the people who create the stuff that they need involved, what's the point? So I'm completely there with you in terms of the mission.
Yeah, I mean, I guess more generally, I work mostly on apps, so we don't have the same issue in the sense that our content only really is like, it's stretched on. So we don't have like, you know, people creating the structure and someone else creating the content. But more generally, I think, you know, I think of the content as the UX, rather than like content and UX being separate things. Like the user experience is the content. So I think just having that separation is something that I just encourage teams not to even think about. And you know, the stakeholders will vary from company to company, but I think just making sure that you know all of the people that are creating content and making sure that you have all the correct stakeholders in the room when you're making these changes is basically how I approach it.
Yeah, I think this is ours.
Oh, okay.
You get to keep that one. That's cool. I guess it's kind of a tangential answer because I haven't really had a lot of experience with teams that are working with knowledge bases per se. But I know that in working with, say, tech writers who are in like lean-based development teams, they are the first people to critique the UX that the developers are coming up with. So in many cases, they are the first line at the front. It's like, you know, this makes no sense. Why is it this way instead of, you know, another, you know, perhaps more obvious flow? So in that way, tech writers, you know, essentially become their own sort of, you know, mini ichael, so to speak, and help with that aspect of the process. I guess the other, you know, angle relating to that though is again you want to, you know, essentially invite as many people as possible to look at an existing UX, be it internal, be it external, and properly critique it. The tech writers have one perspective, but they're not the sole perspective, and there are other ways of tackling that issue from other perspectives. So that's it.
Thank you, everybody. You give me hope for other organizations.
Thank you very much, and I'm going to pass the microphone over to, oh, that's our, who went first? Okay, well, you're closer to me.
Okay, yeah, so my question is for Keith, based on your previous presentation on content strategy and chatbot. In the area of privacy and security, you know, what are your thoughts regarding like the use of, you know, chatbot, like, you know, like GPT, by, you know, workers? For instance, my company, you know, I put in data into ChatGPT and I expect it to give, you know, responses. Is that data saved somewhere? You know, if it's confidential, confidential information I'm putting into GPT? Like, what are your thoughts regarding that?
I'm not sure I can actually answer that in the specifics. Maybe, I see a man in blue over there. Maybe you can speak more to that. So I'll let Rob do that.
So yeah, this is a recent change. Up until very recently, OpenAI has been using the interactions in the interface to help train and further train the model. But with their most recent release of their APIs and their product offering, they've said that now they'll ask permission. There will be, you'll be able to gain or prevent that information from being used to further train the public model.
I think that answers the
Yeah,
question.
it is.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I saw a hand go up back here.
Hello. Hi. So I work as a designer, and so usually when we're designing, it's always usage based, right? But many times when you bring that design, usually you get from the business team like, but business prefers this way. So how do you usually handle that kind of situation? Usually I include like the report, codes, or even a clip so that they could feel the empathy of the user, right? That they're struggling and we need to go this way, not that way. But still sometimes you get a backlog from the business team and saying, no, business would take that call. So how do you usually deal with that situation? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely comes up a lot in my day-to-day. I think one of the points to make is that there are some situations where there's like some tension between business needs and user needs, but a lot of the time this stuff kind of goes hand in hand. So for example, last year I was on a project where we completely redid the navigation of our merchant tool, and we had a lot of pushback from certain product teams saying, my thing's going to be hidden. But overall, what happened is we had 40% more, because everyone wanted to be seen on the navigation, we had a ton of L1s, and no one was really getting that visibility. But having less, a more streamlined navigation helped us focus both on our user needs and on our business needs. So I think a lot of the time, a better user experience goes hand in hand with meeting your business goals. When users understand what they're doing, when they're able to find what they need quickly, that builds customer trust, which then in turn makes more money effectively. That's the reason why big tech companies invest in UX. We see it. So I think it's often trying to find a common ground. And then, making concessions. So, in this case, we made sure that the orders page is at the top because we knew it was the most important. Then the marketing page was just underneath. So there's some concessions as well as kind of building that common ground and also just building relationships with your business partners so it doesn't it doesn't go into this us and them type of mentality. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. I think I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I think having clarity on the goals can be really clear, can be really helpful, because I think business priorities are absolutely legitimate, but sometimes what you see with business pushing back on a choice is that if their goal wasn't clearly articulated initially, like maybe you had a user goal articulated, we want someone to be able to get the information they need quickly, but it turns out the business goal was generate leads. And if you didn't sort of come up with an appropriate solution that does both, and it may be a compromise, maybe an assessment path that leads to a lead gen at the end that is contextual can be helpful to both, but leads you down a different path from a purely informational solution. So I think that's the first thing, to see if you can get the goal, not the solution from the business side, but what is the goal, and then you can sort of back from that and come up with your own solution that sort of reconciles those needs. The other thing is I think can be very useful is
agreeing on the metrics of success up front, and something like pushing back on like, is it just quantity of leads that you want, or can we talk about quality of leads? And maybe this solution will have fewer quantity, but a better sort of proportion of quality, and that lets you drive the solution in a way that, you know, sort of meets the user needs better while avoiding sort of, you know, sort of spammy behavior. The really nasty bit is if you get someone who is, it's just like the hippo effect, the highest paid person's opinion, where like, the person in the room who's got the biggest job title is just, oh, we need that image there because it's a great image. And I think the A/B test is your friend there. Say, we will absolutely create this beautiful thing, and then we will pick whichever performs better. And it's a huge waste of time and effort, but it gets you past that roadblock. The other one, and this is my favorite anti-pattern, is the carousel, which is, sort of UX loves to hate on the carousel because no one ever looks at anything past the first screen anyway. So put that exact image on the second screen. So it's the one really good business use for the carousel, I think. But anyway, sorry.
Great answer. Something small too that I've learned is just kind of like reminding your stakeholders about the consequences of bad UX. Like even if one user in your test finds this problem, that can scale up to potentially thousands of users. And the prevention is worth a lot more than cure, right? So just making sure that your stakeholders understand, like, if this user makes this mistake, we'll have to fix this down the line, and that's going to lead to over budget, over timelines, and just putting that in business, quantifying that in business terms for them.
I think also, I suppose my perspective is focusing a lot on accessibility, and what I've noticed is there's sort of two ways for going about this. The first one isn't maybe super transferable, but it's just sort of the idea that there are certain accessibility requirements that are going to be legally required if your company's based in Ontario in the next 2 years, right, by 2025. So there's always legal threats, right? You can always threaten to tell them the risk they're opening themselves up to. But the other thing is mostly what's been said, going back to the research, right? And talking about you said you're doing the research, and so using that to sort of justify what you're doing, and always making sure that you're basing your decision, you're showing how through what you're doing you're going to address those business problems, right? And sort of showing that connection very, very directly, right?
Sorry, we'll turn this off because of feedback. Anything else that you wanted to add to that?
Thank you so much. Yes, mostly I think it's telling them money you cost a lot later on.
Thank you very much. And I see a hand up over there, and can I get Rob first? Okay, awesome.
Thank you. I may seem a little bit fixated on ChatGPT, so forgive me, but Keith, when you came to the stage, you said, well, I don't know if ChatGPT and wayfinding are related in any way, but I'm interested in your perspective as we see this technology and try to project forward where it's going and how important ChatGPT and voice interactions would be with our customers. And I don't purport to think that websites and even print documentation is going away, that voice and chat are another modality for your content. But my question to the group is, how do you see this new modality of interacting with customers as a means to solve the age-old problem of bringing content from different silos together in one unified customer experience?
Well, there's more than one way to do it because, as you say, there are multiple modalities. There's one vision in which something like ChatGPT becomes, the voice of business, and it becomes ostensibly a replacement for websites, tech writing, and so forth. But in reality, and as I think I more or less demonstrated in my talk, it's simply going to be another modality that people can use if the other options are not optimal. And I think where we're going to be seeing a lot of work is essentially, like training up the ChatGPTs with the specific business knowledge that already exists, training it properly so that people can then use that as the interface they may preferentially want to work with. And I do say may because there will be some people, perhaps older people, for example, that may prefer the older formats, for example. But I also suspect that like ChatGPT, yeah, it's definitely transformative, but it's not the end stage. It's the early stage. My own experience looking at new technologies as they come around, whatever we're seeing now is not how it's going to be 5 or 10 years from now. I wouldn't be surprised now. This is me taking a wild guess here, but perhaps a fully voice activated version of this would actually be the preferential mode for some people. For those whose primary mode of learning information is auditory as opposed to reading, yeah, that's a huge boost for them. So I think we're going to be seeing it also as an assistive technology as well. I think I mentioned to one person I was speaking to earlier that for those for whom English is a second language, it would make a lot of sense to have something like a ChatGPT help convey the ideas, not generate the ideas, but help convey them. And I think that's another way that something like ChatGPTs are going to be are going to be utilized in the future. So not just a single voice of the company, but just simply one modality of many and an assistive technology for others.
Yeah, I suppose, in addition, like to your point of like bringing like siloed information together, I see like some of the early uses of this are, when you do like a Google search, right? At the top, it's going to give you, depending on what you're looking for, Google will sometimes give you some sort of like almost like improved experience, or you look up sports scores or something like that, right? They'll show something different than just a link, and I feel like things like ChatGPT will be used to do more of that, in more cases, sort of give you like more than just another place to go, but give you like some amount of like quick information, which is also where I see its usefulness for things like verbal or like voice-based interfaces, which is sort of also a big area of research with older adults, because it sort of solves a lot of the problems they may face visually or with touch and that kind of thing. So yeah, sort of just being able to like condense information in an effective, automated way, hopefully without being too confident in the mistakes that it makes.
Yeah, I think this one. I think I still have a lot of questions about like the ethics of ChatGPT in terms of like introducing bias, but that's a separate point. But for content governance, when it comes to bringing a lot of different content, which is now owned by different teams, if trained in the right way and if we put in the right guidance, it could be very, very good for like, right now, at least in my day job, we have a global company, we have teams across the world, different teams like engineering, we have local ops teams all producing content. It's very, very hard to be able to have, make it feel like a single voice. It's very, very hard to be able to navigate between them. Something like ChatGPT could really help with that governance process. And content designers are always trying to scale. So we are always trying to focus our time on the structural stuff, the strategy stuff, and spend less time on lower value kind of UX writing and things like that, just helping teams with error messages, helping teams with banners, all of that can help us scale. And so that could be really great in terms of having more consistency, which would, I think, lead to a better wayfinding implementation long term.
So I'm going to be the pessimist here. I think fundamental to ChatGPT's technology is a lack of traceability and accountability. It does not track where the information is coming from. And it's not just a question of garbage in, garbage out. It's high quality information in, inferences lead to garbage out. So you can feed it with tons of factual information, then say, summarize this person, give me like a bio capsule of this person, and it's great. And you say, tell me about the most famous presentation, and it will invent a citation. You say, summarize that paper, and it will invent a summary that is absolutely contrary to that person's beliefs. And it will say all of this with absolute confidence and no ability and no links and no traceability or accountability. So that is the way the technology works. And I think it's telling that Google's big, sort of scared into launching prematurely in response to ChatGPT, launched with an error in their ad campaign, where their version of the AI gave incorrect information about a astronomical fact, or I think astronomical history fact. And of course, you needed to know a bit about that subject area to know. And the people who were deploying that didn't. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of people aren't going to know. And so I think when we talk about sort of getting content from cross silos and so forth, I am, my career is about that. I love that as a goal. I am very concerned that in its current stage, without that traceability and accountability, there is room for what you were basically saying is, for use cases where accuracy is not important and traceability is not important, this is a force multiplier. It's like, we already had too much of that on the internet. That was the problem. The only thing keeping the load down was that it required people to create it. Although there were already tons of AI creating the terrible stuff on the internet. There's tons of scam sites. There's tons of, you go to like a sponsored link on Google, 9 times out of 10, it's a spoof. It's a fake. It's not the local restaurant. It's a skin of it. It's not the it's not the support for that printer. It's a scam site. All of these people are going to be able to create more convincing BS sites more rapidly at scale. Every page on the internet now has a clone that is 90% accurate, that a naive person is going to be able to sort of jump on and be misled by. So that is the thing that worries the heck out of me. And I think until there is traceability and accountability built into the architecture of the technology, it worries the heck out of me. And I think everything we talk about, and I think it is going to be disruptive. I absolutely agree. It's just that disruption isn't always great. And I think right now there are some serious downsides to this technology that the current sort of optimistic assessment about is, they're focusing on the upside, but they're not necessarily looking at how rapidly that downside can materialize. And I mean, you can go on with social media site of your choice and find the sort of the shared horror stories about ChatGPT or sort of the Bing where sort of like you mentioned sort of voice. I think it's hilarious that they actually tried to build voice and empathy into the Bing implementation in ChatGPT, and it's doing things like trying to break up marriages. And I'm not kidding. It's genuinely like it adopts adversarial tones. It adopts weird sort of social stances relevant to the users. Like, this is fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I am watching it so closely to see where it goes next. But but I'm just saying there is, sort of, we look at the realm of possibility, there is a huge realm of negative outcomes here. And I'm sort of thinking about how do I game out responding to those negative outcomes, as well as think about how I can take advantage of the tech. How am I going to deal with the bad actors who are using that tech to outcompete my company in the marketplace of ideas around stuff where we are the credible purveyors of the truth. So anyway, that's my rant.
So just counter to that is that there's the publicly trained model, which we don't have any control over, versus our own models we built internally and train and trust with that information. So does your response change if we're looking at unleashing this within the organization with our own trained models versus relying on what comes out in whatever the publicly trained model produces.
So I think two things. I think training internally can absolutely, it might increase your accuracy. Let's say you increase it to 80, to like 90% or 99%. It's still, as a technology, going to infer an answer when it doesn't know one, which means that as soon as you get that edge case answer, you just provided a potential customer with inaccurate tax information in my case, which might be actionable. Even if we say sort of like, we can throw a ton of disclaimers on it, but it still doesn't make us look good. If we're giving false information, claiming to be the person who will protect your company from, being misled. So I think the place where I can absolutely see a use case is as a internal step to content creation, like fast spinning out versions of the article that then someone who is an SME trims into shape and verifies. But you have to treat it as like, you're getting a rough draft from someone who was a eager and unethical intern. And there's no way that's hitting the site without someone putting their name on it who's going to be accountable for the truth and takes it seriously. And so that it can be like part of a workflow for content creation and publishing. But I think right now, we got to look at adding layers of accountability and traceability as a shell around an engine that is amazing at what it does, but we have to be realistic about what it doesn't.
Thank you. I think we have one more. Yeah, one more to go.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you. So my question is actually sort of leading off of the previous question that was asked, because there's so much terminology out there where you have user experience researchers, you have information architecture specialists, and there's all of these people. There's even marketing and sales and everybody who's sort of contributing ultimately to the user experience in general, right? But when you're working in a corporation, you're also sort of overlapping that with business goals, because you're essentially trying to further the business and then help the business also. So I guess my question is, how do you see this distinction, and also how do you tread that fine line? Because obviously your allies do lie with the user, but also there is the whole concept of you're working for a company to do better with the user. And the reason why I ask this is because if you consider something like Instagram, for example, right, when it comes to pushing out, like they did with the Reels push out that happened, that was very extensively pushed on the user and with technically good user experience, so to speak. The language is all very, post and read and do all of that. But it's not really helping the user as much. So how do you sort of tread that fine line?
I mean, a lot of it is kind of like innovation versus, as well as like working on your foundations. And I think you want a mixture of both. So influencing kind of like your product roadmap so that there's, where I see like the real example is that, this is the trend that, social media is going in anyways, a lot of people on TikTok, and like there is a point at which your users will be super changed first. Like we were so angry when I think like Facebook got the feed, but now a feed is like a pattern used by every single app. So there's that level of like, product does help us kind of push forward in terms of innovation, but that's their only goal. And then UX, a lot of the time we're thinking like, how can we maintain and meet users' needs like as they are today? So I think a lot of that like is healthy tension because it does push businesses forward while still meeting user needs. There are places where it becomes, I think where the tension becomes unhealthy, and that's like when you're looking at UX patterns that deliberately mislead users, UX patterns, and then you're going in a place where like it might be good for business, but it's bad for the user experience. That said, usually in those cases, it's good for business short term. So I think it's about thinking about the longer term. Like those types of experiences tend to, you might, if you're running an experience, you might see like an increase in conversion rate, but what you'll lose out is long-term
trust. And it is tricky because I always go back to trust, but it's a very hard metric to quantify. It's very hard when you're in a conversation with someone saying like, we did this thing and yeah, it was a bit hacky, but look at the results, we made so much money. And you say like, yeah, but like overall we're gonna lose a lot of trust. But they have the tangible results of the experiment, and the trust is harder to convey. And I think it is about firstly aligning on product goals and UX goals. So like, what are the lines that we're not willing to cross? You know what I mean? Like sometimes, when it comes to kind of like marketing and sales, it's like we're not going to show this person twice the same thing. Like if they said no, we're saying that's fine. And then also trying to have effective methods in place to measure that trust long terms, and they're usually qualitative feedback rather than quantitative, doing like regular surveys, talking to your users as much as possible. Also talking to support and ops teams, they have so much information about what users are thinking and feeling. So that's what I would say, but it's a really tricky question.
Sure. So in the finance world, or at least in the context of self-directed brokerages, there is a push by fintechs to kind of introduce gamification and other kind of dark patterns within the apps to the attention economy, get people hooked, especially with finances. It can be very addictive. Gambling, leaderboards, social competition, things like that. And so things like that kind of requires the onus to be on the designer to be a little bit more educated about what is beneficial for the user and for the business, and finding that healthy balance. And being able to push back on that when possible. So similar to what Constance said, kind of figuring out the short-term and long-term implications of that. So for instance, with gamification, it improves a lot of short-term extrinsic motivation. But we also see all these gamification trends kind of lead people down to worse financial returns. And so putting that long-term investment and really trying to sell that and show that to the business is really key.
I was going to say something similar. I guess the only thing I'd add is, in addition to like losing trust with existing users, you also sort of, isolate potential users, right? There's people who will see something like gamification in an app they might want to use and say, well, that's not for me. Like that's not something I can, comfortably do. And so that's like a lot of what I think about in terms of, you're not just losing like trust in people you already have, which is probably like the most valuable thing, but you're also, potentially preventing people from using like a product or service when you like implement these dark patterns. And so that's also part of, I guess, like the case to make against, if there is like a business objective that's advocating for, very extreme gamification or something like this, is who are you now preventing, who are you like eliminating as a potential user base, right? Because there's lots of, there's lots of people at the margins, and when you look at like all of the disabled people, it makes up a huge, they talk about, like different like economic segments, and the disabled population is huge in terms of, how much money they have, because they have jobs, and there's quite a bit of value there. And so even though that's not like the best way to talk about it, like that's not how I like to talk about it, but sometimes that's like the only thing you can use to convey that to business teams and that sort of thing.
And I'll just sort of refer back to something I think I said earlier. Getting clarity on the goals can really help. And something I'm going through right now is having sort of assembled this sort of menu approach, and it's effectively a mapping of, like, in marketing terms, top of funnel content that we know is attracting people, and mapping that to products that we want to sell them. And having spent, roughly a year sort of working that model out and getting it down from, sort of developing taxonomies and identifying topics, let's say roughly 60 or so. And then modeling that down to say, okay, that roughly means we need about, say, 20 or so menus. And then saying, okay, now that I've got that, I want to validate that with our product marketing team and tell me which of those destinations are most important. And we got a prioritization from them, and so it wasn't them telling us what to do, it was them telling us what to prioritize. And then we said, okay, so we want to do all of this eventually, but we're going to hit the things where we're leading to products that have revenue targets that matter the most right now, and that's going to shape our priority. But within that experience, we're going to be trying to serve the user's needs, to give them all the information that's relevant, make their journey as useful and as straightforward as possible. And I take very seriously I think I heard it from Mike Atherton, the phrase, good marketing is user assistance, and good user assistance is marketing. And so, I want the marketing to be helpful. And I think if it is helpful, then that will lead to revenue. And that's the attitude I take. And from the marketing side, and also from the user assistance side, like if we mess it up, we're making enemies. Like we're making the company look bad. That's a branding, sort of outcome. Sort of including business as part of the prioritization and showing how what you're doing is helping their objectives, sort of so far is working well. And I won't say that there's not wrinkles and missteps, but that's the way we're approaching it.
All right, thank you very much. Round of applause for our panelists, please. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for the panel because we do need to wrap things up with the raffle, and hopefully everybody will have time to grab more treats as we go on treats. Before that, though, I want to thank every single one of the speakers here today. It's not much, but you have some personally handwritten thank you cards from our members on the volunteer team to showcase our penmanship. If you can't read it, it's probably me. Here you go. Thank you very much. So, right now I would like to release the speaker back to the wild into more comfortable seats. Alright, so we have a couple of raffle prizes available. And everybody has been registered with a number. So you don't know what number you are. That's okay, because I know. So we have 3 of these outsourcing technical writing by Very Safe. And I am going to go ahead and roll the first one, give you the number, mystery number, and then tell you who it is. Oh, thanks, Rami. This is Zona Ma. Did I pronounce your name right? Great. Next up, closer to 46. Actually, that's Jessie. One more of these to go. Now look. Yay. So the number that we spun is now what? 8. Number 8 is Philippe Tavera. Yay, please come on up. Okay, this is a big one, and if you're okay with it, we want to take a photo of you with this and then we post it. Is that all right? Excellent. Please try your outstanding pose in front of the photographer. Thank you very much. I want to talk about getting involved with the World IA Association. We have a lot of different projects like State of IA, content collection, translation, websites, World IA cafes, community research, and a lot more. We also have different communities like events, community, education, accessibility, publications, and communication. There's also the global board, WIAD planning committee, regional co-director, and all the different major continents. So if you are interested, we are more than welcome to, you're more than welcome to talk to any of us, or go online, look us up, and join, because we can always use more experts like you in the field. Where you would go is worldiad.org/get-involved. Aside from that, what you're going to get in your email is probably a survey very soon, because I can't get the QR code up for you to scan right now. So we will send you a survey. And really what this is just a survey on what your opinion of IA is in the current world. Not this event, overall IA. This information gathering will help us to understand how information architecture is being conducted worldwide. And all the responses are anonymous and will be published in an aggregated form in the State of Information Architecture report. So really, really would be helpful if everybody can participate when you get that email. Of course, we also have a couple of communities. We have Discord, which you can find through the main website as well. Join us there, whether you want to join regionally or globally. And also we can join the communities on Veto as well. Again, all of us through the main website, worldiad.org. That being said, we are preparing for next year already, which is far away, I know, but these things take time. So the next World IA Day is March 2nd, 2024. We are looking for volunteers, new members to help us organize even bigger and better events. So this is a half day because we want to slowly introduce everyone back in after, everyone's been cooped up, socializing is really hard. But next time we want a full day. Unless everybody tells us, emails us like, no, that's terrible, I don't like people. Then we won't. But otherwise, we're gonna try to do a full day next year. So if you're interested, again, reach out to Josh, me, or the global IA community. Photos are really awkward from the thinking. And otherwise, we are open to more conversation afterwards. We're mingling around as we're tearing down. Pull us aside, we're happy to chat, or find each of us on LinkedIn. All of our profiles are on the World IA Day Toronto website. Before you go, please help us clear the drinks and the snacks because we bought way too many. So thank you very much again for coming today. I hope everybody makes it home safely through the snow. And once again, happy weekend, happy IA Day.